Hello and welcome to Newsclick. Today we have with us Srinivas Ramani from Economic and Political Weekly to discuss the recent election results in Sri Lanka. Srini, the election results have been a little unexpected. So what do you think has happened to make this possible?
It was a very unique conjuncture. What happened was, till about 1 month ago, nobody expected the coalition that Rajapaksa had built after winning the civil war would fray away so quickly. What happened was the SLFP, the Sri Lankan Freedom Party, to which Rajapaksa belonged to, the old guard of the SLFP, was slowly getting disenchanted with the concentration of powers within the Rajapaksa family, and they actually identified the right moment to stage some kind of an internal coup within the SLFP and pitched Maithripala Sirisena's candidacy for presidency. Maithripala Sirisena's presidential nomination actually got the opposition together and created a coalition of forces that was as strong as what Rajapaksa had built in 2010. So this confluence of forces at the right moment actually helped build a sufficiently good opposition to Rajapaksa and turned out a victory for Maithripala Sirisena.
In essence, the Sinhala politics that has been propounded for quite some time, which was anti-Tamil, which is also anti-Muslim. We have certain attacks on Muslims which have been taking place for a couple of years. So that is one element which of course forced these forces to vote for Sirisena. But the other part is that the Sinhala majority has really split. Though again Rajapaksa has taken a lead, though not a very significant one in the Sinhala areas, but it has obviously split. So what was you said that Rajapaksa was really the reason for the split, and you talked about the family. So can you give us some examples of what he did with the Sri Lankan government and his family?
After winning the elections in 2010 and after winning the civil war, the expectation was that Rajapaksa would be liberal enough to devolve power to some extent. Also would release some of the powers that were concentrated in the presidency. And there was talk that the executive presidency would be slowly weakened and then the parliamentary system would be given strength. Instead, the reverse happened. What Rajapaksa did was strengthen the executive presidency even further. He actually moved the 18th amendment to the constitution, which actually concentrated even more powers with the executive presidency. He removed the 2-term limits on the executive presidency and then also created a system of patronage wherein the government was concentrated in the hands of his own family members. For example, his younger brother Basil Rajapaksa was given the economic reconstruction ministry. The defense ministry was under Gotabaya Rajapaksa. His elder brother was the speaker. His son was being promoted in the SLFP, and almost 70 to 80 members of the Rajapaksa family were given important posts in the bureaucracy and the government. All this actually got a number of people in the SLFP old guard a bit disenchanted, and they felt that this was actually leading leading Sri Lankan politics into what was similar in what was happening in Pakistan, for example, a military dominated and authoritarian presidency. So this was not seen well within the Sri Lankan Freedom Party, and Chandrika Kumaratunga, the former president who had actually given up on active politics, actually came back to active politics and actually orchestrated this internal coup in some sense. So that actually resulted in the split within the Sinhala majority.
And she is from SFLP, again, the same party.
She is from the same party.
She was the president from SFLP. But there are two elements to what you just now said. One is an imperial presidency, as it were, which was dynastic in its nature. The second, of course, is the importance of military and building a military industrial complex which will also be under the control of the Rajapaksa family and be as an economic center of power. So in that sense, not just corruption, but also a structural change in the Sri Lankan economy in which military would play an important role.
There is a reason why the military became dominant. After winning the civil war, actually the victory in the civil war was made possible because a large sections of the rural peasantry in Sri Lanka, especially in the southern parts of Sri Lanka, were recruited into the army and they were used in the war against the LTTE. And after the war got over, the military got involved in various economic activities as well. This was a way to keep placating the Sinhala rural peasantry and keep them employed. And in a post-war situation where there was economic crisis, this was one way to provide employment to this to the rural peasantry. That was one structural reason for what the Rajapaksa regime did. Apart from that, the Rajapaksa regime also wanted to, in order to strengthen its power, it militarized not just the economy, it also militarized the polity to a great extent. The free press was curtailed, and all kinds of authoritarian rules and activities were engendered during this period. So ultimately, as you said, a military-industrial complex was built in this last 5 years, which was a product of the civil war in some sense. At the same time, it was also instrumental in consolidating power under Rajapaksa. Now, the Rajapaksa probably felt that the memories of the civil war is, the victory in the civil war is still fresh, and that's why he called the elections 2 years before the scheduled time. But it actually backfired against him, because ultimately there was a section among the Sinhala majority population which was disenchanted with this concentration of powers.
The other part of it, which again not much comment is being made, is the UNP Ranil Wickremesinghe becoming the Prime Minister. Now, he has been also identified as one of the architects of neoliberalism in Sri Lanka, and while Rajapaksa has been also a part of capitalist concentration, but there is a certain degree of independence in terms of what SLFP has always stood for. So it has been a combination of this Sri Lankan or Sinhala nationalism, Sinhala chauvinism, if you will, which is anti-Tamil, anti-Muslim in this current phase and even earlier, and also being nationalist in the Sri Lankan sense of the term. While Wickremesinghe or the UNP represented always the quote-unquote liberal values, but were also much more openly pro-rich and pro-West. So do you think there is with this alliance of Wickremesinghe and the Sirisena, is a change in terms of how its foreign policy will be and economic policies will be?
Economic policy, I don't see much of a change, but actually it's other way around. The SLFP, in some sense, adopted the policies that the UNP had come up with in the late 1970s. What we saw in the last 5 years was major financialization of the economy, a true move towards neoliberalism. Of course, the military playing an important role in the economy, but the Sri Lankan government being dependent upon China in particular, indebted to Chinese aid, Chinese investment and so on. So I don't see much of a change going to happen in the next few years. But on foreign policy, one important change that is going to happen is that the Sri Lankan ruling classes are slightly worried about the pro-China tilt, because relations with India have always been important to the Sri Lankan ruling class, irrespective of its neoliberal or populist character. Relations with India have always been important. So this this protracted pro-China tilt that was made possible during the Rajapaksa regime, there are reasons for that, because the international community was putting pressure on Rajapaksa for war crimes. Therefore, he had to orchestrate a foreign policy that's pro-China. He realized that China plays a major role in the international geopolitics, and therefore China could protect him from the Sri Lankan regime per se from international censure. So that was the reason for the pro-China tilt. But these forces, the Tamils in particular, require Indian Indian support for their cause. I mean, not necessarily the Elam cause is no more now. At least for a federal cause, India has to play a role over there. And I think the Sinhala ruling class also feels that this over dependence on China is not something that's going to be good for them in the long run.
But also with United States and the
Absolutely.
West as a consequence, and also with the financial institutions of the West as a consequence, because Sri Lanka could play a certain degree of game, as it were, because the Chinese also provide aid, they also have financial clout. So therefore, that is something which, they were getting frozen out under what you pointed out. So some rapprochement with India and also with the West.
With the West,
that's the other part of it. So in that sense, going the old UNP route. This has been always UNP, is not the India part, but certainly the Western route has been always UNP's part. The last point I'd like to take up with you is the question of the Sri Lankan Tamils. Now, they have about 9% of the population, and they voted en masse for Sirisena. They have also not made any demands on him regarding devolution of powers and so on. So, devolution of powers that has been in the air, which Rajapaksa never conceded. Do you think that's more likely to happen under Sirisena?
We have to wait and see on that. But one thing that's going to be beneficial for the Tamil ruling parties, I mean the Tamil National Alliance, is that in the previous election, the local elections that were held in Sri Lanka, almost the entire country, the SLFP was the victor, except for the northern province where the TNA was victorious. And this was not a good conjuncture for them, because ultimately the budgets and spending, fiscal spending is decided by the center there, and there are virtually no powers that the governor enjoyed. So having an antagonistic president was of no, almost tied the hands of the government in the northern province. Now, because they have some say, whether that say will be decisive or not is another matter, it remains to be seen, but because they have voted for Sirisena, and therefore they have a presence in the mandate, and they are not going to be dependent upon the goodwill of the president, but rather on the mandate that they have. Possibly this could lead to greater, greater devolution of fiscal resources for the time being. Because, for example, the Indian aid to the northern province is was more than the budget that was given to the northern, that was given to the northern province by the Sinhala center, Sri Lankan center in the last couple of years. Now that kind of situation might change now. Whether devolution of powers will happen or not will depend upon how long this this conjuncture lasts, wherein you have the Tamils and the Muslims and a section of the Sinhala majority coming together to vote out authoritarianism. Whether this conjuncture will last for some more time, and maybe if people like more progressive leaders like Chandrika Kumaratunga play an important role, who realize that devolution of power is important and the national question is still not resolved in Sri Lanka, if these forces actually have a say in the longer run, maybe devolution can happen. But all said and done, the change of power actually bodes well for the Tamils rather than the status quo. If the status quo persisted, if Rajapaksa was still in power, that was a very that was not a particularly congenial situation for them.
That is obviously the reasons why the Tamils have voted against Rajapaksa, and also the Muslims who were attacked by this Maithripala Sena and so on have also voted for the opposition, in this case Sirisena, because they felt Rajapaksa was really extending his patronage to anti-Tamil and anti-Muslim forces. Thank you very much, Srini. We'll keep on watching Sri Lanka, and we'll keep on watching Sri Lanka with you.
Thanks. Thank you so much.